So the agenda that we're going to be going through today is talking a little bit about why so many clients are choosing ServiceNow Risk. There are some unique differentiators. There's also some really smart ways to get started with data migration and system cutover. And it's not difficult. One of the things that we hope you walk away from here is the fact that this shouldn't be a scary conversation to have if you're thinking about migrating from another solution or just implementing ServiceNow GRC. There is definitely an easy way to do this, and hopefully by the end of the webinar, you'll see that. And then how to get the most from the transition to ServiceNow IRM. Those tips and tricks that you can use to make sure that you're getting the most from your investment. So my name is Teresa Law. I am the Director of Product Marketing for the Risk and Compliance product. And I am very happy to be joined by Edgile, an elite partner. The Edgile team are industry experts, and they have a wealth of information and experience with GRC. Brian, would you like to introduce the rest of the Edgile team and yourself?
Fantastic. Thanks, Teresa, and thanks everyone for joining us today. This is Brian Risman speaking, joined by a few of my colleagues, Jay Dial, Hunter Freeman, and Ian Dura. I'm one of the two practice partners here at Edgile that looks after our ServiceNow risk and security practice. Jay is our lead senior solution architect. Hunter is one of our managers, and Ian Dura is one of our senior consultants. You know, we brought Hunter and Ian on. They were the ones who were in the trenches, actually, to use Teresa's word, working very closely with a lot of our clients on their migrations from legacy GRC solutions to the modern IRM ServiceNow platform. Jay runs a team of engineers and architects, also supports a lot of our go-to-market efforts, and as well serves a bunch of clients. So, you know, these guys have a lot of experience that we're looking forward to sharing with you today as part of a case study. As Teresa mentioned, we're an elite partner of ServiceNow. One of the things we'll talk about is actually why we decided to make a decision about 3 years ago to tune our entire GRC practice exclusively to going to market with ServiceNow. There's a lot of goodness there that we're going to be bringing to life, you know, throughout the conversation today. And just some additional background for those of you that are not familiar with Edgile. We're a boutique implementation firm. We really focus on three things as a firm: our security and risk practice, which is 100% wrapped around ServiceNow. We have a cloud security practice where we're partners with Microsoft, as well as an identity practice, which we're largely wrapped around our partner SailPoint. And what's great there is that they're all partners with each other, ServiceNow, SailPoint, and Microsoft. And we actually spend a lot of time bringing together synergies and efficiencies, you know, between all three of those organizations. So really great to be here today and looking forward to the discussion. Thanks, Teresa.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Brian. Well, I wanted to kick off a little by talking a little bit about secure ServiceNow risk and compliance. And one of the reasons clients choose ServiceNow, and one of the key things about risk and compliance that make it effective, is the ServiceNow platform that is truly an enterprise platform. So whether you're using service management, or if you've got solutions to support your customer service or HR practices, one of the really unique things here is that all those applications are collecting information, whether themselves are collecting it or if they're integrating with third parties to do that. And all of that is being brought into the ServiceNow platform. So that single data model is what is so useful for risk and compliance, to be able to provide that enterprise visibility across your compliance posture and new risks. The common data model, the built-in system of intelligence, is something that you don't find with other products. If you were to have to integrate multiple products together to be able to provide that data to your GRC solution, you would be spending a significant amount of time and money, not only in integration, but also in maintenance. The single platform solves that problem, and then our integration hub, which provides spokes that are already crafted and integrated into our platform to make that integration, that third-party integration, easy, is something else that really simplifies your life. The other thing that is unique about the risk and compliance solution is the fact that we can embed experiences into the first line. So on the next slide, you'll see that risk and compliance makes it easy to engage the first line with other products. We can embed them using drop downs. If you already have a ServiceNow product, drop downs within familiar user experiences, making it simple for your front line. We can use chat functionality, our mobile interfaces, make it easy for your front line to be able to seamlessly and invisibly support your risk and compliance efforts. Again, something that other GRC products don't provide you, but it does make it simpler for you to be able to implement and to be able to effectively manage your risk and compliance. On the next slide, we can see that, through all of this data collection and workflows that we have created using our no or low code workflow designer, which is kind of drag and drop interface, again, making it really simple for those that are not GRC experts to be able to use GRC effectively. All that information is being presented on portals and dashboards. So this really allows you to see the information you need to see in the way that you need to see it, to be able to make better decisions and effectively drive your programs. We provide business performance status updates, your risk and compliance posture, all based on your role through our easy to use and easy to customize and tailor dashboards. So to sum it up, on the next slide, we can see that ServiceNow really is the only modern integrated platform, provides unique benefits to you, simplifies the process of risk and compliance, and allows you, through the continuous visibility that it provides across the enterprise, to be able to stay on top of risk and compliance very easily. So I want to turn it over to Brian to give you a little bit more details about how you can actually take advantage and implement this product.
Fantastic. Thanks, Teresa. So first, before we jump in, we're going to talk a bit more about, why are so many clients choosing ServiceNow Risk for IRM solutions? And really, I think Teresa brought up a really good point, previously, is that, ServiceNow is a platform. It is not a point solution, which a lot of what we're seeing when we talk about these legacy GRC solutions, arguably many of those are point solutions just serving the needs, for governance, risk, and compliance. But what we're talking about here is very different, with ServiceNow being a platform with the common data model and a lot of the capabilities that Teresa showed on that football slide and just walked through. It's arguably a solution and a platform that all lines of defense, so whether you're in the business, whether you're in the compliance function, whether you're in audit, if you're a ServiceNow platform customer today, I imagine you've likely logged in to ServiceNow in one capacity or another, to the service catalog, to request a help desk ticket or an item, follow up on a workflow and receive the notification, all coming from ServiceNow today. So it's a very familiar platform, that we're seeing, folks get comfortable with using. We know risk and compliance activities can be quite daunting, if you will, and the end users that you're looking to engage with oftentimes aren't excited and interested in working with a separate solution, especially a point solution that they're not familiar with. And what's so great about being on a platform like ServiceNow that people are familiar with is that user experience, and people have that familiarity and comfort with it. Arguably as well, a lot of the controls, so the performance of controls, may actually already be performed in ServiceNow. So if you think about things like change control, things about the approvals for user access requests, perhaps fixed assets and others, that data is actually sitting in ServiceNow theoretically already, a lot of that control performance data that the second and third lines of defense want to take advantage of. So there's a lot of synergies, if you will, in being able to bring all lines of defense onto a common platform. One of the other things we kind of joke and talk to folks about, I'm speaking to people in all different lines of defense, is, let's think about a risk and control matrix, for example. One of the kind of core foundations of being able to be responsible for performing controls, monitoring controls, or auditing controls. Arguably, each line of defense has a different risk and control matrix that they're working from. They were probably tracking issues in disparate systems, on spreadsheets, in legacy solutions, et cetera. Now, bringing everyone together on a common platform, all lines of defense with the right data, you're able to have more efficiencies by having everyone using a common risk and control matrix. Now there's one register for issues and risks. There's a lot of efficiencies that can be gained, from everyone working together on their risk and compliance functions. As you'll see on the next slide, really this is about, finding relative quick time to value, and being on a ServiceNow enabled solution, there is significant lower overhead in those assurance activities. We talked about the user experience through the service catalog and the portal. That is a significant way to accelerate that usability and allowing people to quickly request a policy exception, raise an issue, work through an assessment. And that's something that folks are generally very familiar with. These integrations that you arguably would be doing as well with maybe your current legacy solutions or with point solutions, you would need to be building an integration with the CMDB, with change control, with security operations, business continuity, et cetera. And those are all integrations that now are natively available on ServiceNow. So the question that we asked ourselves 3 years ago, we have a lot of our clients asking is, if all of these things are on ServiceNow already as native capabilities and functionalities, why would you not put your risk program on top of ServiceNow IRM? So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jay, who's going to walk through a couple options that we see folks, choosing as it relates to which path do they take as it relates to migrating from a legacy GRC solution into modern ServiceNow IRM. There's kind of two typical paths that we see folks take. So we'll have Jay walk us through what those are, and then the team will talk through some case studies about each of those. Jay?
Thanks, Brian. So, now that we've made the decision that ServiceNow is a good fit for the organization, leveraging investments that have already been made, and really made that decision to move forward, well, how do we get there? How do we start using the IRM functionality? And as Brian mentioned, there are two paths we typically see folks go down. The first is electing to archive data from that legacy point solution. Let's store that information, in flat files or on a shared drive for historical purposes if we need to access that. But let's use this as an opportunity to refresh and reboot our processes. Let's adapt, best practices and leading practices for our program. And so that's kind of that option one here, where we want to make changes to our processes, or something about our program has changed, whether that be the focus from a regulatory perspective, or we're changing a risk methodology, or we just want to unwind some of the complicated processes that have been built up over time. In that instance, this option one's a great choice. It avoids some time-consuming efforts around extracting that legacy data, transforming it, and loading it into the system. And a lot of clients find this to be a low-value investment because of the fundamental changes in their program between the legacy point solution and what they're looking to use going forward. The other big advantage of kind of this option one is you get quick time to value. You can leverage quick starts. Edgile has a series of quick starts that get clients up and running in 8 to 10 to 12 weeks typically on these solutions. And being able to leverage those accelerators can really jumpstart your journey on ServiceNow. Now, we recognize that most folks, or some folks at least, don't have that luxury of being able to say we're going to save off that data in a separate place and have a reason to carry forward that data into ServiceNow. That's kind of this option two, is where we migrate the data to ServiceNow. And we find that for success, leveraging folks who have done this before, certified implementation partners who have been through this process, know where the different traps are in terms of migrating data, can really set you up for success. You can still use this as an opportunity to transform your processes, and you oftentimes need to work through any type of custom solutions that may have been built. So on a lot of legacy solutions, extending that functionality into custom applications or very complicated processes, we need to take the time to actually work through and determine, is this functionality that needs to be carried forward? Where does that fit well within ServiceNow? Because a lot of times there is native functionality that can be leveraged, and making sure that we don't inadvertently cause ourselves future pain by customizing ServiceNow, trying to get a one-to-one replacement of our current processes. The last piece is we look to port that information around your control frameworks, your risk register, business hierarchies and assets to ServiceNow, really setting you up for success and for your stakeholders, the business and other end users who have been using that point solution, giving them a familiar experience. It should feel like a smooth transition for them. And so these are the two options we see most folks go down. There are clients who go with a bit of a hybrid approach, finding data that maybe needs to be migrated, but archiving a large portion. And we're going to go through two case studies here where we focus on a couple of organizations that we've worked on who have gone down each of these paths. So with that, to tee up the first case study, this is going to be an example of that kind of archive the data and start new. And Hunter will be walking us through this case study. Hunter?
Thank you, Jay. Hello, everybody. So kind of looking at this very first example of a client who did have that luxury of being able to make a relatively clean break from their legacy system, archive off their data, and make the move to ServiceNow. I had the personal pleasure of working with a world-renowned children's healthcare provider. And at the time we were working with them, information security was a board level priority, but they were locked into a legacy system that wasn't affording them sufficient flexibility, and it was siloed off and only being used by those information security teams. So they were facing a lot of reporting challenges, abilities to integrate well with the wider business and provide that risk intelligence and things to other first line functions, and really make sure that that board level priority was demonstrably being met. So when they started making this strategic decision to align to ServiceNow, they were fortunately already using the platform in many other areas of their business, much like Brian and Teresa have touched on. So the prospect of being able to provide that familiar user experience was very exciting. That said, their legacy use cases, they were using the LockPath GRC solution, and they were covering everything from their policy lifecycle management, their draft, review, publish, approve, as well as their compliance testing and reporting, vendor risk management programs, their risk register, and even their issues and remediations. But all of this was off in this siloed system that made it difficult to actually facilitate those processes and working with the business. Now, they faced the fortunate case where they didn't have strong regulatory mandates or internal mandates to maintain any of this information that they had in their legacy solution and to bring it forward into ServiceNow. And so that's what ultimately drove them to take this kind of archive approach, simply saving off the data from their legacy system, maintaining it in case it ever needed to be referred back to in the future, but using this as an opportunity to really transform their programs and processes to meet this board level priority, as well as to support another key driver of their use case, which was increasing cloud adoption and the need to have better interfaces with the IT teams that were facilitating these transitions into the cloud. So as we worked with them, this turned out to be a really prime example of where making that clean break, and they leveraged those agile quick starts, which Jay and Brian mentioned, to rapidly get their GRC programs stood up on ServiceNow and really provide that quick time to value so that they could demonstrate forward progress on meeting these board priorities. So we worked with the client to understand what some of their existing processes within LockPath were around these various use cases, helping them to then understand how they could adapt and streamline these processes, weeding out some of those complex touch points, unnecessary toll gates and things that had worked their ways into the process over time, and really trying to streamline them so that they would be better positioned to work with the business on ServiceNow and provide visibility as well as a positive customer experience for these first line functions that they'll now be working with. So the key driver for their success ultimately ended up being really how much change could the organization adopt and manage within a short period of time. And so we looked through our portfolios of agile quick starts covering their use cases and ultimately settled on about a 12-week project to stand up all of these use cases. They were ready and willing to adopt this change to make this leap. And so working with them to understand that legacy LockPath solution and where there were options to streamline through the agile quick starts, we worked with them through a standard approach to say, well, what were those reporting questions that they were originally trying to answer from their legacy solution? And what were the questions they were being asked that they couldn't answer from their legacy solution? So taking that reporting first approach to understand how ServiceNow could better answer the questions they're facing and to make sure that the processes we stood up and the workflows would ultimately answer those questions. We present them with just a quick series of easy decisions that can be made that will ultimately inform what that workflow looks like in ServiceNow. And we can quickly stand that up, providing detailed requirements up front with those key decision points incorporated, UAT plans to facilitate testing, as well as getting some of those business users who previously weren't able to be involved, those first line functions, getting them involved in the UAT process so that they can participate and start seeing how this is going to transition the way the organization is managing risk and compliance by directly working with those first line functions. And with a training and communication plan and early frequent previews of what this build was, they're ultimately well prepared to go live with the solution, adopt this level of change in these processes very quickly, and get everybody moving forward so that they were able to meet those board objectives, as well as start supporting these cloud use cases they were facing. Standing up vendor risk assessments, for example, very quickly, and being able to get those out to their cloud providers to start meeting one of the core pillars of a cloud management, vendor risk management program. But just to kind of wrap up the journey here, what ultimately helped make this successful for the client was that willingness and flexibility to transition from their legacy processes and streamline them. So spending that time up front to understand what their process was and what it could be on ServiceNow, while eliminating some of those time sinks that had crept in, having a clear reporting vision of what questions they would now be able to answer in ServiceNow that they couldn't answer before, and making that reporting available to those first line functions and executive stakeholders. And understanding that this was a transformation for the organization, starting from a minimum viable product that would meet the needs, but leave them flexibility to grow in their program and process over time as new use cases arise. And they helped avoid a lot of the pitfalls we see with clients when they're making this transformation of overly customizing ServiceNow to either accommodate legacy data, which fortunately they didn't need to, or to force a legacy process that really wasn't flexible enough to carry forward into this business-facing version of the world. And so with that, I'll hand it back.
Wanted to make a quick comment here, just and call something out, especially on the point about workflow last. And I know when we're especially being on ServiceNow, people look at us sometimes and they're like, "Why would you do that?" We want to be on ServiceNow for all the workflow and automation, and it's pretty interesting, being really in a ServiceNow world, our team right now, we always assume that a lot of folks are coming from a lot of automation in their legacy GRC tools. What we find actually is that they're not. That they really just have homes for data and really have customized a solution in a way that doesn't even allow them to get the automation and the workflow and the flexibility that they're looking for. So what we want to be judicious of is, we know workflow and automation is super important. It's one of the many reasons a lot of folks are moving their programs to ServiceNow. But what we need to do first is remove the friction from the people on the process side of things before we go start automating things. So, automation and workflow is definitely there. It's a key part of the ServiceNow world, but we want to be smart taking them from a place that they're likely not getting a lot of that today. And then, overnight bringing them to a world that's overly automated. So it's a journey that we take them on, and it's a very important one. And it's a bit of an art that we got to find, when working with our clients to make it work well for them.
Yeah, and I think that's really important. It is a journey. There is definitely a maturity there that you go through. It's not a sprint. But I think one of the things that Hunter said that was really, really important, that I think a lot of people don't realize, is you taking the time up front to have those conversations, to look at your processes, to figure out what you want it to be, is going to make the rest of the process so much simpler. It's just that pre-planning, having those conversations and having someone can ask you the right questions to really make you think about, what is it that we really want? Are we doing this because that's what we thought we should be doing, or because we were doing it, or are we doing it because that's really the way we should be doing it?
That's right.
So I think that's a point that people don't focus on enough when they're actually thinking about migrating or implementing. So that's a great point, Hunter.
Yeah, that's why we're spending a lot of time on this archive and kind of start fresh option, because oftentimes the data model has morphed over time. And if you actually were to ask customers, clients of ours, and saying, well, why are you capturing that data? Why are we spending the time and actually, get new fields and capturing it? They said, well, we've been doing it that way forever. Well, are you reporting on it? No. Well, if you're not reporting on it and it's not addressing a question, you likely don't need to be capturing it. So, spending that time up front to really also talk about that reporting vision. We're going to share some of those hard questions later as a takeaway as well that we typically take folks on from an implementation journey perspective, because that also, will allow you to get really focused on the data you need to collect and not capture more than you need. And then you'll get down to a path of having, too much, overly customized, et cetera.
Yeah, and I think the flexibility of the ServiceNow platform, I think, is key to letting you do that and having those options to offer
Exactly.
the clients.
Fantastic. Well, thanks, Hunter. That was great. We're going to turn it over to Ian now, who's going to talk us through case study 2. And that was more of the option 2 that Jay spoke about before, where we are going to go through a data migration process of the legacy data, and work through how we bring that into ServiceNow, as painlessly as possible. So with that, we'll turn it over to Ian.
Thanks, Brian. So covering our second case study, this was a global manufacturing company, and they were using legacy GRC platform Archer. So one note about this client is they had a large number of stakeholders who were using Archer, as diverse from PCI compliance to SOX testing. There were really a wide variety of interests of what they needed out of their GRC platform. As due to this, they had done a lot of customization within Archer. And what I mean by customization is the out-of-the-box solutions within Archer weren't meeting the needs of these teams. So they wrote a lot of code to get them up to snuff. What that resulted in is that, say one of these teams wants to make a change, you really needed a GRC expert to understand all the inner workings of these custom built applications to make even simple modifications. So expanding upon this, there were a lot of teams involved, and over the years, 10 years, they accumulated a lot of data across Archer, SharePoint, and email. And it really seemed like they were having trouble keeping all their data within their GRC platform as it wasn't meeting their needs. And they had to keep some data within SharePoint or over email, which was not ideal. Building on top of this, they also had regulatory mandates requiring retention. So their bloat problem with data and difficulty to maintain was only going to get worse over time. Archer was scheduled to be sunset within 8 months. So because of this, leadership identified ServiceNow as a strategic platform moving forward. So one note is that this client was already a ServiceNow shop in certain ways. They had their ITSM, ITAM, ITOM, ITBM already in ServiceNow, and it made a lot of sense for them to move the rest of their processes from a legacy GRC solution to ServiceNow. What we find is that when clients have even some of their processes in ServiceNow, it makes it a really easy transition into ServiceNow from a legacy GRC solution.
Ian, maybe just a quick point here is that this particular client had the benefit of knowing they had approximately 8 months to get all of this sorted with a large number of stakeholder groups, but we've worked with clients as well who have much shorter timelines, something in the 6 to 8 weeks before we have to make a go, no go decision as to whether we're going to continue with our legacy solution. Is it too late for me? And the answer a lot of times is no, it's not too late. There are techniques that we can use to get you that necessary data, kind of that minimum viable product that we touched on in option 1, but get you on a journey and get you going towards using ServiceNow in the long term. So just something to keep in mind.
Thanks for that, Jay. We can cover some of the more specifics on the next slide. So I'm going to walk through a bit of the process of how we actually achieve that seamless transition from legacy GRC to ServiceNow. So our first step was we really wanted to walk through the legacy system and understand all its ins and outs. Legacy GRC platforms may have a lot of custom reporting or dashboards. The way their processes work might be really complicated. So we go in there and we kind of just understand everything that's going on. Once we have a thorough understanding of current state, we can move on to analysis and field mapping. So the way we go about this is we basically do a one-to-one mapping of all the data that is in the legacy GRC platform and basically show the client what it's going to look like in ServiceNow. This is really important to the overall success of a project because we want to make sure that all the data that's captured in legacy GRC solution is going to be moved over correctly to ServiceNow. One other benefit of this step in the process is that you can do data cleanup. If some of the processes are really complex, you might be able to eliminate some of the data bloat that isn't needed. We've seen a few examples of this happening where we've been able to eliminate some unnecessary data while doing this field mapping step. Also wanted to note is that for this client, they were able to set up their business hierarchy and IT operating environment, leveraging integrations with Active Directory and CMDB. I think it makes a lot of sense when you can leverage these integrations and get your environment set up within ServiceNow to then move the rest of your data from another platform and keep it all just contained within ServiceNow. It becomes much easier to do that.
Yeah, and I think that's another one of those benefits, Ian, of having that information, everyone using ServiceNow, is that we're having apples to apples conversations with the business, with the various members of IT, when we're talking about our risk and compliance programs as they are using for their operational processes. So this client had the benefit of having this pre-built in ServiceNow for their use. But a lot of times we work with clients to help understand, is that data in a system of truth and can be brought in, or is that something that's in your legacy system that needs to be migrated, but really making sure that as best as possible, we get towards a model that can be used between all the lines of defense, so we have that kind of consistent apples to apples conversation. So.
Thanks for that. Our final step is
Jane, a lot of that.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry, Jane. I was going to comment there. I think a lot of that also supports driving dynamic reporting and accountability and allows you to get to the audience specific reporting that I think a lot of folks likely weren't able to get in a legacy system, but really desire. So if you're looking to report on risk by application owner or risk by business unit or division, those hierarchies are changing and dynamic. So you need a way to being able to recreate those hierarchies based on organizational changes. And if you already have those integration points with things like the CMDB, with Active Directory, et cetera, in ServiceNow, you're able to keep those current. So you're able to get a lot more reliability on your reports, knowing that when you're pulling down an audience-specific report, that it is current. So just another one of those benefits to double down on, because you probably heard us say many times reporting first. Now we're getting into reporting first, but now audience-specific reporting and taking that to the next level.
Okay, moving on. Our final item is setting a cutover date. There's a lot of specifics involved with actually getting all the data into ServiceNow, but without getting too technical, we have basically the methods and tools to help automate that process as much as possible. And with that, I will turn it back over to the team.
Perfect. Well, Ian, thank you. And we just got a question that came in here that I wanted to put out to the team. Really about this is great, and we appreciate you walking through the process, and how we're able to get them, migrated with their data. But it seems like a lot. And one of the first questions, where you get from folks is, we've got a small team, so how are we going to be able to go do this, swiftly and accurately? So, Jay, I see you're still on video. Do you have any kind of thoughts on, how we've been able to work with clients who have small teams as we need to work through this data migration exercise?
Yeah, we've worked with, a variety of clients with everything from, a massive multi-team, multi-continent platform team to those folks who have, that one person who's responsible for all of GRC and IRM, and we've successfully worked with all of them. So long as you have someone who's, knowledgeable on the current system in terms of those processes and what data exists, then we're able to work with them. We take that, effort to do the mapping, load a couple sample records into ServiceNow, kind of art of the possible. This is what it looks like, and take the time to review with that individual. So the heavy lifting through our transformation and loading methods, really does not overburden the client's team. So I guess in short, not a large team at all.
Yeah, and Jay, I was actually going to say, I'm glad that you asked that question, because I think also to that point is you guys have the processes in place. You have the ability to help customers do this. You've done this before. But I want people to be thinking about the fact that this isn't like we're just taking everything and just uplifting everything and just dropping it all down. This really is a process, and it doesn't have to be an onerous process. It can be a staged process that can make it very, I don't want to say simple, but much less painful than you might imagine that it could be. The other thing that I wanted to mention that I thought was really interesting that Ian said was there is issues with over customization. So I think the one thing to really point out is something that we stress is, we've done 80% of the work in ServiceNow. It's out of the box. There's always going to be some configuration that you might want to do, change the color, add another field, things like that. That doesn't change the fact that when you upgrade and you can maintain your product, that it isn't changed at that point. You don't have to redo that every single time. So the maintenance of the product to be able to stay current and use new functionality very quickly and very easily as we come out with them every 6 months, or sooner in some cases, is there with the ServiceNow platform, as is the scalability, because we also do hear that scalability is a real issue. So the cloud-based platform, we don't have the scalability problems. But I think we're transitioning to over how do we get started and what's that staged approach?
No, absolutely. So kind of some of the smart ways to get started. And there are a lot of techniques we can use from a data migration perspective. And not to get too technical, but we were able to use automated methods, such as using like an API connection to your legacy solution to extract that data. We can write scripts, so it's not a swivel chair exercise where someone's got the old system on one screen and ServiceNow on the other, manually entering it. And as part of that, we can start to pull through any attachments. If you have history logs or audit logs in that legacy system that also need to be pulled through, that is possible as well. Ian mentioned as the last point, as part of that second case study, system cutover. And this sort of drawing the line in the sand, when are we going to stop entering data into our legacy system is important to define so that we know where the different data should be entered. A lot of times what we'll do is we'll say, all right, let's take an initial load. Let's say 2 months before we're ready to make that hard cutover, let's pull the data out, let's get it loaded in, and let's work with the team to review that. Let's make sure it's been loaded correctly, that everything is as it should be before we make this hard cutover on that set date. And so as part of that, as we start to get closer to that, we'll start to pull in Delta updates. So only pulling in data that's changed in that interim period, and really gives you the confidence that the data has been migrated correctly, and doesn't make it a very abrupt challenge where we've said, all right, Friday is the last day you can use Archer, and then we've got 2 days mad sprint to get that ready. We want to avoid that as much as possible. So using that kind of Delta change, what the Delta change in the data to migrate really eases that stress and that last minute crunch during the cutover.
Jay, we got another question that was, I think, relevant at this point about, is it possible to run ServiceNow alongside Archer for a period of time? And if so, what is the resource overhead? What are the gotchas? What are the things we need to know, if that would be a decision that someone took?
Yeah, absolutely. You certainly can. And there are a few techniques you can use, one of which is that kind of delta data migration technique I just mentioned. So if you need to run them in parallel, a lot of times clients will like to do a bit of a pilot where it's a soft go live from a ServiceNow perspective, using that to train up the business, but knowing that the regular processes need to run as usual. And so let's continue using Archer in this example. In the interim, while we get folks trained up, we run this pilot, we have them validate the data before we cut over. Another piece is a lot of times folks will start with a particular piece of functionality from a legacy solution like Archer and start that in ServiceNow. A good example would be issues management. We see that a lot. It's a great place to start because it's common functionality amongst a lot of the different risk and compliance and assurance groups. And it's good to get folks on board with that early so they'll commit to bringing on their processes, hopefully allowing you to completely deprecate the legacy solution. So I think the only gotchas there is just be cognizant if you're running 2 systems in live production, that you have some sort of mechanism to keep that data in sync. Last thing you want is 2 users working the same record in the 2 separate systems and not know what left hand, right hand are doing. So if that's a requirement, looking at some sort of integration or business process to make sure that data is regularly refreshed would be a good way to mitigate that potential problem. All right. So I think we've touched on most of these at this point, but some of the tips for success, if you have custom legacy applications, understanding what are your must-have versus nice to have features and reporting capabilities. It really comes down to that minimum viable product to get us up and running, and then we can make enhancements along the line, as part of the journey. So let's not hold ourselves hostage for one-to-one replication of our current functionality, because sometimes that is not necessary. Let's confirm our mandates, understand our charter and our policy, any external compliance regimes. Let's perform that detailed walkthrough of the legacy application and understand the data that needs to be migrated. The old joke of, well, making the pot roast my mother always used to make. I cut off both ends of that pot roast before I put it in the oven. And I asked my mother, well, why did she do that? She said, that's because how my mother did it. So I go ask my grandmother, why did you do that? She says, well, I didn't have a pan big enough for the roast. So understanding those little oddities from processes that have evolved over time, really making sure that we're making smart decisions. And the big piece here is we want to have that prototype early so that you can see what the solution is going to look like. You can see what the data is going to be in the system so we can get sign off and make adjustments if necessary. Ultimately using that prototype to prioritize requirements, so that what is minimum viable product based on that prototype is have we balanced that correctly? And ultimately, I think the last piece there is, don't forget to refresh your processes, your procedures, and define roles and responsibilities, because with the new system, those likely have changed.
And likely become more automated, simplified, more modern. So you can't be using those legacy processes and procedures. That's a great point, Jay. We had another question come in, and it's a good transition. I think you touched on it a little bit, Jay, to the next point we want to make here is, where do you get started? Where do some folks, think about beginning their journey in migrating from a legacy GRC tool to modern IRM? You mentioned issues management. I think probably 50% of the migrations we do actually start with that issues management use case, where we're getting a lot of stakeholders on board with all the open findings and that process, remediation plans, et cetera, to work through. You'll see on the next slide, another version of the journey that we typically then layer in here, where we start with Edgile's 5-pass journey. This has worked for a lot of our clients as well. It's actually the same journey that the large healthcare provider, that kind of case study 1 that Hunter walked through is on, where we start with an integrated risk register, bringing together your risk and compliance requirements, tick and tie back to your laws, regulations, and frameworks. Edgile has content accelerators to help you do that and build that risk register based on your specific industry. We then build out what we call the applicability matrix. If you're familiar with ServiceNow terminology, there's a concept called entity types and entities. And this is when you start building out those relationships of your entities, your applications, applications, and you're basically modeling your operating environment and letting you know where those risk and controls apply to start getting you specific opportunities to report on risk and controls by your organization. In Pass 3, that's when we introduced the survey capability. We call these diagnostics. Other folks might call those assessment surveys, attestations, the technique of sending questionnaire styled surveys to folks to solicit information, whether that's yes, no, I don't know, or asking a specific question, providing evidence, using that technique in Pass 3. And then leaving Pass 4 and 5 for your highest risk areas, where you're looking at your actual controls and doing your kind of control testing, evidence-based sampling and testing of controls in Pass 5. So this is another example of a journey that we take folks on, whether it's for a migration, when they're starting out with no legacy GRC tool, or if they're migrating, from a GRC platform to modern ServiceNow IRM. I think on the next slide, we've covered a lot of this here already before. Teresa brought up a really good point about configuration versus customization. The way I kind of frame it is a lot of the things that in a legacy GRC tool would have required to have been customized, that functionality now, arguably, much of it is all configuration driven in ServiceNow, given the flexibility. And there's things that work out of the box. There's things that require light or heavy configuration, all that really support those long-term considerations that you see here, especially around upgrade paths. So with the frequent upgrades and new functionality coming out from ServiceNow, you want to make sure you're building this in a scalable and sustainable way to being able to take advantage of those new features and not go down a path of customization. I would say the need to go down that customization path in ServiceNow almost doesn't exist anymore, given the flexibility of configuration. On the next slide, we'll quickly talk about, this is bringing us back together about the power of the ServiceNow platform and the native integrations that you'll be able to start taking advantage of. You'll see things, on the right-hand side in the main honeycomb around how you're passing information from IRM to vendor risk management, from vendor risk management to business continuity management, back into security operations, and leveraging the ability to have, scoped applications with functionality, with native data being generated as the golden source, that you're able to share those data objects. And what's even greater then is that through those entities and entity types, you're able to connect back through the rest of the platform. So, ITOM, ITSM, ITAM, ITSM, ITBM, you're able to then make those linkages with the CMDB, with application portfolio management, if it makes sense to make those connections. If not, you can make great progress just within the confines of the scoped applications of the risk and security solutions. And really the last point we wanted to make here is that, you've probably heard us say reporting first is really important, numerous times here. This is an example of a takeaway that we're going to be leaving behind with all of you, thinking about the tough questions that you likely want to be having answers for through moving from a legacy GRC solution to modern IRM. So, these are some of the starting point questions that we use as part of our quick starts and accelerators. With working with clients on getting up and running on ServiceNow, something for you to take and leave behind and think about. Do you have answers to these questions today? And my guess is that you might be looking, working to address these offline and not in your legacy tools. And how great would it be to start getting access to this information in real time, leveraging the dashboards and reports coming from ServiceNow? And this is really one of the big benefits that you'd be able to get in moving to a modern IRM platform.
And I think these slides are available so people can download this, print it off, put it up on your wall as wallpaper, so you can refer to it. I think this has been a great conversation. I think from a ServiceNow perspective, I think the main takeaway here is, whether you're starting your GRC journey to begin with, or whether you're migrating from another GRC product, it doesn't have to be daunting. It doesn't have to be scary. The ServiceNow single platform provides you the breadth of functionality and the flexibility that you need to be able to bring your processes in, to be able to configure them the way you need to configure them, to engage your frontline employees, which is unique in a GRC solution, but so very important. And all of that with the scalability is going to save you a tremendous amount of time that you're now spending on manual processes or with other solutions that are very cumbersome and difficult to use. It's going to save you time on maintenance. And it's going to be able to allow you to take advantage of new features faster, which is also really important. But the main thing is getting there doesn't have to be a painful experience.
Absolutely, Teresa. Well, with that, what we're going to be also doing, folks, and I think we mentioned this before about, these are the foundations. We need to get you up and running on ServiceNow IRM, whether you're coming from something or nothing. Really, the next step then is once you do that, promise it's not painful, is then how do you take it to the next level from an automation perspective? You think about continuous controls performance and continuous monitoring. So we have a webinar coming up on the 18th of August. Camille will put the details in the chat window. We'll also be sending out reminders to folks where we're going to go talk about how can you take that great data that is already on ServiceNow or that ServiceNow might already have an integration with that you can leverage and set up indicators and do continuous controls performance, continuous controls monitoring, leverage techniques around proactive evidence collection, leveraging evidence warehouses, and a lot of good stuff from bringing your program to the next level. So we can quickly get you up and running here as we spoke about today. And then now we can talk about how we can get to the next step. So we look forward to having you join us on the 18th. We've also provided a series of resources for you. Myself and Teresa are very happy to continue discussions with any of you. And you'll see a link to some websites where we have some additional materials. So with that, Teresa, I'll turn it back to you to close us up.
Absolutely. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Jay, Ian, Hunter. I think this was a great discussion, some amazing material. I love the takeaway because it gives people something to actually take away and use. It's very actionable. Looking forward to the next webinar. Thank you for speaking today, and we look forward to seeing you then. And thank you, all of you who attended the webinar. We're very pleased to have you and hope you found a lot of value in it. Goodbye.
Thanks, everyone.